The rain fell in sheets across the manicured grounds of the Westbrook estate, drumming against the stone pathways and turning the carefully tended gardens into a watercolor of grays and greens. Inside the modern glass and steel mansion, Daniel Westbrook stood at his home office window, watching the storm with the detached interest of someone who had insulated himself from life's discomforts. At 41, Daniel had everything success was supposed to bring: a technology company worth hundreds of millions, a house that had been featured in architectural magazines, and investments that grew while he slept. What he did not have was anyone to share it with. After his divorce 5 years ago, he had convinced himself that solitude was preferable to the complications of human connection. The knock on his front door was so faint, he almost missed it beneath the sound of the rain. Daniel frowned, checking his watch. It was nearly 9 in the evening, and he was not expecting anyone. His housekeeper had left hours ago, and deliveries did not come this late to his gated community. The knocking came again, more urgent this time, and Daniel set down his tablet with a sigh of annoyance. He walked through his gleaming, empty house to the front entrance, already composing the dismissal he would give to whatever solicitor had managed to get past security. But when he opened the door, the words died in his throat. A little girl stood on his doorstep, soaked to the skin. She could not have been more than 5 years old, with auburn hair plastered to her head and pink pigtails drooping sadly. She wore a pink flowered dress and a beige cardigan that clung wetly to her small frame, and her feet were bare, covered in mud and scratches. But it was her eyes that stopped Daniel's breath. Huge, terrified, and filled with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "Please," the child said, her voice breaking on a sob. "Please help us. They hurt my mom. She's dying." Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This could not be real. Children did not appear on doorsteps in storms, begging for help like something from a movie. But the little girl's terror was absolutely real, as were the muddy footprints she had left on his pristine stone entry. "Where is your mother?" Daniel managed, his voice coming out hoarse. "In the woods," the girl said, pointing back toward the tree line that bordered his property. "She told me to run and find help. There were bad men and they hurt her, and there's blood, and she won't wake up all the way." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Daniel felt something crack through the careful walls he had built around himself. This child was in crisis, and she had come to him because his house was the first one she had found. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, crouching down to her level, feeling the rain soak through his white shirt. "Emma," the little girl whispered. "Emma Foster. Please, you have to help my mommy. She needs a doctor." Daniel's mind raced through options. "Call 911 first, then go find the mother. Get the child inside, warm, safe. Move quickly but calmly so he did not frighten her more." "Emma, I'm going to help your mother," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. "But first I need to call for an ambulance and the police. Can you come inside where it's dry?" Emma shook her head violently. "No, we have to go now. She's bleeding. She told me to find help fast." Daniel pulled out his phone and dialed 911 as he stepped back into his house, grabbing a jacket from the closet and his car keys. He gave the dispatcher his address and a rapid explanation as he led Emma through the house to the garage. "I'm going to find her," Daniel said into the phone. "Send police and ambulance to my location immediately. Child says there were assailants, possible assault. Victim injured in the woods behind my property." He hung up despite the dispatcher's protests that he should wait, because Emma was already climbing into his Range Rover, her small body shaking with cold and fear and desperate urgency. "Which direction?" Daniel asked as he started the vehicle. "That way." Emma pointed toward a service road that led to the woods. "We were camping near the creek. Mommy said it was safe there. But the men found us." Daniel drove as quickly as he dared on the muddy path, his headlights cutting through the rain and darkness. Emma sat forward in her seat, straining against the seatbelt he had buckled around her, her eyes scanning the trees. "There!" she cried out suddenly. "Stop, stop!" Daniel slammed on the brakes, and Emma was out of the car before he could stop her, running into the darkness. He grabbed a flashlight from his emergency kit and followed. his expensive leather shoes slipping on the wet ground. The beam of his flashlight found them 30 yards into the woods, a woman lying motionless on the ground, her clothing torn and muddy, blood matting her blonde hair. Emma was kneeling beside her, shaking her shoulder and crying, "Mommy, wake up! I brought help. Mommy, please!" Daniel dropped to his knees beside them, his training from a long-ago first aid course flooding back. He checked the woman's pulse and found it weak but present. She had a gash on her head that was bleeding, bruises forming on her face and arms, and she was unconscious but breathing. "Emma, I need you to be very brave," Daniel said, shrugging out of his jacket and laying it over the woman to keep her warm. "Your mommy is alive, but she's hurt. The ambulance is coming, but I need you to help me. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her teeth chattering from cold and shock. "Tell me what happened," Daniel said gently, applying pressure to the head wound with his handkerchief. "Can you remember?" Through stuttering sobs, Emma told him about living in their car for the past month after they lost their apartment. Her mother had been trying to find work, but jobs were hard to come by. They had been sleeping in a camping area in the woods to avoid being seen, trying to stay safe. Tonight, 2 men had found them, demanding money. When her mother had nothing to give, they had attacked her. "Mommy told me to run," Emma whispered. "She said to run and not look back and find help. I saw your house with all the lights on. I thought someone nice must live there." Daniel felt tears burning his eyes for the first time in years. This child had been living in the woods, had watched her mother be attacked, and had somehow found the courage to run through a storm to save her. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. Daniel stayed kneeling in the mud, maintaining pressure on the woman's wound, while Emma held her mother's hand and whispered that everything would be okay now. When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly and efficiently, loading the woman onto a stretcher. One of the EMTs tried to separate Emma from her mother, but the little girl clung with desperate strength. "I'll stay with her," Daniel heard himself say. "I'll bring her to the hospital. She knows me now." The EMT looked doubtful, but a police officer who had arrived with the ambulance nodded. "I'll escort them. We need to get statements anyway." At the hospital, Daniel sat in the emergency room waiting area with Emma wrapped in a blanket beside him, her small hand clutching his. A nurse had cleaned her cuts and given her warm clothes, but she refused to leave the waiting room until she knew about her mother. A doctor emerged after what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes. "Emma Foster's family," she called. Daniel stood, gently lifting Emma. "I'm here with her. Her mother, is she okay?" "She's going to be fine," the doctor said, and Emma burst into fresh tears, this time of relief. Concussion, some cuts that needed stitches, bruising. She was lucky. Another hour in that cold and wet, and we'd be having a different conversation. "She's asking for her daughter." They followed the doctor to a small room where a woman lay in a hospital bed, clean now and bandaged, an IV in her arm. Her eyes found Emma immediately, and she reached out with a trembling hand. "Baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed, and mother and daughter held each other and cried. Daniel stood awkwardly near the door, suddenly aware that he was an intruder in this private moment. "Thank you," the woman said, looking at him over Emma's head. "The nurses told me you found us, that you helped Emma. Thank you for not turning her away." "Anyone would have helped," Daniel said, but even as he spoke, he knew it was not true. He lived in a neighborhood where people did not answer unexpected knocks on the door, where strangers were threats to be avoided. "I'm Sarah," the woman said. "Sarah Foster. I don't know how to repay you for what you did." "You don't need to repay me," Daniel said quietly. "I'm just glad Emma found my house." A social worker arrived then, asking questions about their living situation, about family, about resources. Sarah answered with quiet dignity, explaining about the job she had lost, the apartment they could not afford, the slow slide into homelessness that she had been fighting against for weeks. "We have shelters," the social worker began, but Sarah shook her head. "I've been to the shelters. They're full, or they're not safe for Emma. I've been trying to keep her safe, trying to find work, trying to keep us together until I could get back on my feet." Daniel listened to all of this, watched Emma curled against her mother, and made a decision that surprised him as much as it would have surprised anyone who knew him. "You can stay with me," he said. "Just temporarily until you get situated. I have more space than I know what to do with, and it's empty anyway. Emma can have her own room. You can recover from your injuries, and it will give you time to find work and housing without living in your car." Sarah stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "We can't accept that. You don't even know us." "I know that your daughter ran through a storm to save your life," Daniel said. "I know that you've been trying to keep her safe and fed and cared for despite impossible circumstances. I know that I have resources I'm not using, and you need help. It doesn't have to be complicated. Why would you do this?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. Daniel thought about his empty mansion, about the years he had spent building walls and keeping people at arm's length. He thought about Emma's terrified face at his door, about her courage and her love for her mother. "Because Emma knocked on my door tonight," he said simply, "and I'm glad she did." 3 weeks later, Daniel returned home from work to find his house transformed. There was music playing in the kitchen where Sarah was teaching Emma to make cookies. There were drawings on his refrigerator and children's books on his coffee table and laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for years. Sarah had found a job at a local elementary school. Working in the office, she was saving money for a place of her own, insisting she would not overstay her welcome. But Daniel found himself hoping she would not leave too quickly, that Emma would keep filling his house with joy and questions and the messy reality of life. The police had caught the men who attacked Sarah, and she was slowly healing, both physically and emotionally. Emma had nightmares sometimes, but they were getting less frequent. She had started calling Daniel Mr. Daniel and had appointed herself the official decorator of his previously minimalist home. That evening, as they ate dinner together at the kitchen table, Emma looked up at Daniel with serious eyes. "Mr. Daniel, did you know you saved my mommy's life?" "I think you saved her life, Emma," Daniel replied. "You were the brave one who found help." "But you opened the door," Emma said. "Mommy says lots of people wouldn't have opened the door. She says you have a good heart." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Sarah, who was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "You both gave me something, too," Daniel said quietly. "You reminded me that having everything means nothing if you have no one to share it with." 6 months later, Sarah and Emma were still living in the west wing of Daniel's house, though now it was because they had become a family rather than because they had nowhere else to go. Daniel had fallen in love with Sarah's strength and grace, with the way she had rebuilt her life with determination and dignity, and Emma had stolen his heart completely, teaching him that the best things in life could not be bought or calculated or protected behind gates and walls. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as interruptions, as unexpected knocks on the door during storms, as desperate pleas from small children who trust us to be better than we thought we could be. And sometimes opening that door, choosing compassion over convenience, changes not just one life, but all the lives it touches. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about courage, compassion, and the unexpected moments that change everything. Comment below and tell us about a time when helping a stranger led to blessings you never expected, or when someone showed you kindness in your darkest hour. Your story matters, and sharing it might give someone else the courage to open their door when opportunity knocks.